sense of soul.
Hey Soul Seekers, it's Shanna. Journey with me to discover how people around the world awaken to their true sense of soul. Now go grab your coffee, open your mind, heart, and soul.
It's time to awaken.
Today on Sense of Soul, we have Dr. Patrick K. Porter. He is a neuroscience expert and is the inventor of BrainTap. Dr. Patrick has spent his life asking a radical question. What if we could train the brain like a muscle and transform lives without pills, struggle, or guesswork? As a pioneer in brainwave entrainment since the 1980s, Dr. Porter saw possibilities where others saw limitations. Through BrainTap and his upcoming book, Brain Fitness Blueprint, Dr. Porter is leading a global movement to help millions reclaim their mental clarity, emotional resilience, and human potential, one brain at a time. And he's joining us today to tell us all about this. Please welcome Dr. Patrick K. Porter. Thank you so much for coming on Sense of Soul. I really appreciate it. I look forward to hearing about your journey and how you came to where you are today.
Well, if you can go back in time with me for a moment, in second grade, I was held back. So you think about it, I was a creative artist. I didn't want to be in school. I wanted to be out playing football or drawing or doing artwork, and I was held back in second grade. And I thought Sister Barbara just loved me a lot, and that's why she wanted me back in her class. But then my dad was also a chronic alcoholic. I mean, he was terrible. And the church came over, a couple of church members came over and said, "Hey, we're going to teach you, Michael, how to relax." And he's like, and I was surprised, the whole family was surprised. I grew up with 9 kids in my family. And he went to the relaxation seminar and stopped drinking because he realized that the reason he was drinking was trying to relax. And it was called the Silva method. And my dad's one of those guys, once he puts his foot in the water, he dives up straight in. So he became one of the first instructors. They called him a silver instructor, which means he was one of the oldest. He's no longer with us, but we basically grew up doing seminars around Lower Michigan, teaching people how to meditate. And they used something called the Silva sound, which now, because of science, we call it isochronic tones, but we didn't know that at the time. It was a weird sound that they played in the background of the seminar, and we would have to start it up. And while my dad was speaking and teaching the seminar, this music would be playing, it would synchronize the brain to alpha. And so that got me engaged, but I was never really going to do it. My dad did. When you're growing up, you never want to kind of be like your parents, really, or at least I didn't want to because I didn't have a great role model. But then as I was going through school for electronics, my dad, basically, I kept helping him with seminars, and I got old enough that I started giving part of the seminar. And then I kind of liked it. And I got involved with a group called Light and Sound Research, and we created the very first portable light and sound machine. So what you see out there in the world with frequencies and binaural beats and isochronic tones and all these things, they started from our company, Light and Sound Research, in 1986. We developed a piece of equipment called the MC Square. It was the first portable light and sound machine. So we've been doing it a long time. I've developed 16 different devices, and we have 3,000 clinics out there in the world using it right now, and we have 120,000 users that are out there bettering their brains. And I'm on a mission to better 1 billion brains. So thank you for having me on so we can help your listeners.
Oh my gosh, I'm loving this because, gosh, so many things. First of all, I remember when I was in therapy, I was told that I had ADHD. And I knew this because I had always struggled as well in school, and I didn't have any tools. And now that I have learned some tools and have some in my toolbox, I really wish I would have as a kid too.
Right, right. Well, my dad became very smart about what he did. When we got in trouble after he got help, we didn't just get into our room to think about what we did. This is one of the worst things a parent can do. What he did was he sent us to our room with a book. And the first book he sent me to the room with was As a Man Thinketh. And so I had to go read that book. And I remember I was only like 12 years old, and I had to come out and tell him how I was going to apply those principles because faith without works is dead. So I did that with my own kids. Now I have grandkids. But the thing is that we can take our negative experiences and we can dwell on them and amplify them because what we put our attention on grows. Or we can take them and say, hey, this is my learning ground. Because everybody out there listening is going through, some of them, are going through the dark night of the soul. And every superhero has to go through that because whatever you're going through right now, that's your superpower. You're just
Mhm.
learning what your kryptonite is, so you can avoid that kryptonite. You need to put it in that lead box and move on, and know when that kryptonite shows up, hey, that's a trigger for me. And if you find out what your triggers are, that ADHD is not a bad thing. Every successful person I've ever interviewed, ever spoke with, ever scanned, I've scanned over 30,000 brains, and I know that they all have ADHD. The problem is that they don't know how to harness that power. And the power in ADHD is creativity, because so many people are so myopic. They get fixated on there's two there's different intelligence, right? We have academic intelligence, which a lot of people value, which is okay, but really transcendence is where it's at. So if you have transcendent knowledge, that means you have a problem, you're going to solve it. Doesn't matter how you're going to solve it, you're going to solve it in the best way possible for everybody to create that win-win-win scenario. The win for you, the win for them, the win for the world. And I think when people have transcendent knowledge, that's what ADD is about. You look at a problem and you go, I can't believe this is happening. Like, if we look at the world today, if we look at the news, of course, we think that the world is going to hell in a handbasket, but that's not true. They have to scour the whole earth to get us 1 hour of bad news every night. That's pretty sick, right? So I always tell people, if you're too happy, your life's going too well, just turn on CNN. You're going to be miserable in 5 minutes, because they're designed to engage your triggers. And some people just don't know how to get their emotions flowing and think of emotions as energy and motion. So as somebody with ADD and ADHD like me, I just had to figure out that everything is cyclic. You're going to have good times, you're going to have bad times. Don't fly too high, don't fly too low. But notice when you're going there, and get back to center, get back to focus, and know that there is a power greater than you that's assisting you. And if you tune into that power, then the answers will come to you. And if you're really honest with yourself, you're never faced with a problem you can't solve, because in our universe, every problem has a solution and every solution has problems. And when you make that choice, make the choice boldly and say, hey, I made the choice, I can always make another choice. You don't have to be fixated on that. And people, one of my trainers, Richard Bandler, who started NLP, he was one of my first trainers, and he said, besides my dad and Dr. Paul Adams, but when I went to his training, he said, anything worth doing well is worth doing terrible at first. And people don't realize that. But as children, think about it. You were a child. If you have children too, when they learn to walk, they fall down in 100,000 different ways. But when they walk right correctly once, they very rarely fall down, because as a youngster, we do something called neuropruning. In neurophysiology, we talk about what it does is the brain forgets all the mistakes and only remembers the positive one. But as we get older, we start to use judgment. We start to think too much about it. We start to think what other people are thinking, brothers, sisters, parents, preachers, teachers, all those people. We start to think too far beyond our control. So that's when it says, be centered, be calm, be relaxed. You're doing all right. You're going to get through this. This is going to change. Life is going to get, the one thing we can count on, right, is that change is going to happen. You're never going to be in the same place. In fact, while we've been sitting here, our Earth has moved 166,000 miles an hour. So we're not in the same universe anymore. So things are changing all around us.
It reminds me of the very first time one of my therapists suggested that I go to a mindfulness class.
Mhm.
And I was like, what? I'd never heard the word in my life. This is a little over a decade ago.
Mhm.
And so I go to this class, and I'm sitting there with a group of people, and they're doing an exercise. And it's a tangible exercise where you can feel the paper, and, and then they're having us smell everything. And I don't even know what they were saying, because the entire time on this first mindfulness class, all I did was say, I can't breathe right. I can't even think. I can't even listen. And then all of a sudden, I noticed my thoughts. And I was like, who is this shit talker in my mind that refuses to give space to this moment? And why do I not think I deserve this? I mean, it was the first time I witnessed this voice in my head that was so mean and so cruel and so unforgiving. And I thought to myself, I would never, ever tell anyone the things I was telling myself. So, yeah, I thought it was a failure, but it
Yeah.
was
I
that
mean,
moment that was kind of a catalyst.
yeah. Most people don't realize they have 60,000 word tape loop that plays in their head. And they say 80% of them are negative. Now, that's not a negative thing, because think about it. The Hopi Indians say that 7 generations are influencing you right now.
Mhm.
Epigenetics says 7 generations are influencing your gene expression right now. So how did science and the Hopi Indians get it right? These are all truth. I mean, science is now proving out all these ancient traditions. So this negative voice is to protect us. Imagine, it wasn't too long ago. If you look at the timeline of Earthlings on the planet Earth, right? We've not been here. Our little existence here of 100 years or so, that's not a very long time. And it wasn't long ago that we were waking up in huts and, meeting by the tribal fire and, hunting and gathering. So our brain is actually trying to keep us alive. It's trying to keep us safe. And unfortunately, that means we have to be very vigilant. It's called the default mode network, or the reticular activating system in neurophysiology. So when you close your eyes, there's two things that happen that most people don't realize. One is your brain thinks you're going to go to sleep, because now you're settled down, you're going to go to sleep. Now the default mode network comes on. Now you're awake and it says, okay, am I safe? What's going on around me? And then that voice shows up, and you did the exact thing. That voice is like the wind. You just let it roll, because once you know that voice, you can edit it. Most people don't realize, just like we have computers now, we can go in and we can start editing the script, and we can start realizing that we can put our own positive information in there. And that's where like affirmations and, just mindfulness is not really focusing on anything. It's just being there, being present with yourself. Because most people don't, I have an expression, most people don't feel from the neck down. They don't realize they have a body, until it gets hurt. They have some pain in their body, and their body says, hey, wake up. I'm feeling a little discomfort here. What's going on? That's why. And the other thing is that when you close your eyes, we know in neurophysiology that 30% of your brain will go to sleep. So when people do yoga, which is I love yoga and people practicing it. The whole reason yoga, I do a lot of work with Ames Bhopal, which is the MITs of India. There's 6 of them. And we do a lot of research with them. And we proved out a lot of the pranayamas and things like that with my technology called NeuroCheck. And what we showed them was how the brain focuses there. But the reason they did yoga was to get your brain prepared for meditation, because most people don't have enough energy to meditate. Right now, we have an energy deficit in the world. You've probably heard that we have a mental crisis in the world today. We don't have a mental crisis in the world today. What we have is a physiological crisis. People are sitting too long, looking at screens. They're not moving and breathing. Our body needs to move and breathe, and so does our nervous system. So when you were doing that mindfulness exercise, you were moving neurons. And if you don't use those neuron pathways, they shut down, because the brain is pretty lazy. It uses 25% of the energy resources of the body. So if you're not going to use that circuit, and I'll give you one example. If you speak more than one language, then you have a circuit in your brain that stayed awake. Now, if you only learned one language at about age 7, that circuit shut down. And then when you got to college or high school and you tried to learn another language, it became very difficult. But if you learned another language before 7, that circuit stays active. And my science officer, Dr. Sadral, he's actually pretty famous for photobiomodulation in the brain. And he speaks 6 languages. And we were on a trip to India. And after 3 weeks being there, he started speaking Hindi. And I said, Francisco, when did you learn Hindi? He goes, we've been here for 3 weeks. I'm going, what do you mean? Because that's how our brain learns. When you learned as a child to speak English, you didn't look at books. You didn't learn verbs and adverbs and sentence structure. You basically absorb that language through a brainwave called theta. That's called hypernesia. So when we get into that mindfulness state and we start dropping into alpha and theta, those brainwaves, you have a super memory. You are far more capable than anyone told you about. What they're looking at is when they tell you have ADD or ADHD, they're talking about the front desk administrator. We want to talk to the CEO. You're the CEO. And you don't even know that CEO right now, or most people don't. I mean, we get a glimpse of it every once in a while when we have those peak performance moments, and we have the moments of lucidity and things like that. But when you get into those mindfulness states, you start to tune in and build that frequency base around you. And that's when you really, like your podcast, you connect with your soul. You connect with the information system, because it's all information, it's all energy. Right now, as we're sitting here, your DNA, which if I could take your DNA out and stretch it out, it'd be 80 billion miles. It would go from here to Pluto. And it's made of a crystalline structure. Its whole job is to absorb light energy and transmit that light energy as codes to your body. Then your body will transmit energy to the codes and bring it out. And what they proved in 2018 was that it changes every 40 seconds. So every DNA pair in your body changes. Remember in 2003 when they said, hey, we mapped the human genome? They only mapped 1% of it. And they said 99% was junk. But in 2018, they figured out it's not junk. It's changing so rapidly. You personally are changing so rapidly. Every part of your body is changing so rapidly. So when we tune in, when we slow down, we stop the noise that's happening in our everyday life, we focus and we get into those rhythms. That's why we use brainwave entrainment, because we need to get the brain into the right rhythm, because we can spin out, right? One bad text, the average person looks at their phone 300 times a day. Now, that's okay if you're positive, if you're a positive person, but if you're a negative person, you actually trigger a chemical reaction in the body that is terrible for you. It's a stress response. Your sympathetic system triggers, your liver dumps 25 grams of sugar into your bloodstream, your insulin pump turns on. When I was featured in People magazine in 2006, they said, how did you get these people to lose all this weight? Because we sent them over 1,000 people that had lost half their weight and kept it off for more than 5 years. And I didn't have a diet. I said, it's not what you're eating, it's what's eating you. So what we do is we have to shift that conversation, and then you'll eat better because you're thinking better, because your thoughts precipitate, they say that thoughts are ancestors to action. So if we think about what you're thinking about and you change that initial trigger, the old saying, you can't get the horse back in the barn. We need to work on the horse when it's in the barn, not when it's out in the field when we can't catch it. So many people are trying to catch it out there in the field where they need to settle down, relax, calm down, get their brain frequency, get their body frequency right. And now they can start to control from that CEO perspective and get the changes they want in their life. When somebody says, what changes your epigenetics? Everything from the lights you're under to if you're walking on the earth barefoot or if you're listening to music. Think of every cell like the lungs. They're breathing. Now, when you get it stressed, they go into cell danger response. They actually stop transmitting energy. During COVID, they did a study with people because if you go to the NIH website, you can look up biosphere. And they actually say on our NIH website that every illness starts in the field because we have a field of energy that surrounds us. We have a magnetic field from our heart that broadcasts infrared light. Every person broadcasts this light, and this light carries codes. So when you're with somebody and you're having a conversation with them, you're having a verbal conversation, but you're having a subconscious conversation too. That's why when we meet somebody and we get good vibes or bad vibes, when they say that, there's actually physical truth. So those vibes, those cells are resonating to them. So when you're doing a chant or a mantra, and I studied TM and I do that every morning, and I do the city meditations and things like that, you're basically setting the tone for the day. And that's why, and what amazes me is that they won't set a soundtrack to their life. We are in such a great time right now. We have cell phones. We can listen to an orchestra. We can listen to rock music. We can listen to whatever we want, whatever the thing is. We can set the soundtrack to our life. But some people will still just leave it up to the universe or leave it up to their negative thinking to do it. On the internet, you can go to YouTube and put in metronome synchronization. And when you go there, you'll see a guy starts 300 metronomes all at different times. Within 3 minutes, all those metronomes are synchronized. They all at the same time. What we found in the brain, it takes about 7 minutes for both hemispheres to synchronize. Mantras, music, there's something called the Mozart effect that is really well researched, and we use it in the BrainTap system too. But this music is 10 cycle music. It happens to be alpha. So what alpha does, by the way, every brainwave triggers a neurotransmitter. So there's 54 different neurotransmitters. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll tell you a few of the basic ones. So when you're in that mantra and you're doing your alpha, you're into meditation, you're creating more acetylcholine. This is the feel good, happy neurotransmitter. Now, when that chemical's in your system, you just dumped about $16,000 worth of neurochemical. You can't take enough, right? But we have the world's greatest pharmacy between our ears. 30,000 different neurochemicals can be created in a moment's notice with a thought. So when you think about it, we have this pharmacy in our head, and people will leave it up to the universe or leave it up to their life to create good or bad moods. And that's why one of the favorite sessions on BrainTap is one I did called Biohacking Happiness, because you can hack the system. You can choose to be happy, no matter what's going on in your life right now. I love the Starbucks commercial that used to be out where the guy gets up in the morning and there's these cheerleaders cheering him on to go to work. And I said, that'd be great. I mean, if we walked out the door and we have these cheerleaders, but we have to become our own cheerleaders. We have to set ourselves up for success and not be so disappointed when bad things are going to happen. And that's just the unfortunate thing. Everything, in order to have the best of times, we have to have the worst of times, or we wouldn't know they were the best of times. So, but it's what we focus on that's most important. So it's about thinking about outcomes that are positive. What would your life be like if? How would you do it? Who would you be with? These you ask the right questions, your brain will give you the right responses. But if you demand of the brain in the wrong tone, because it's the emotion that drives behavior, not what you think you want to have, or even your intentions. If your emotion isn't right, you have to set your emotions first, and that's where music comes in. I think is a great soundtrack and a great way to start your day.
I had come across, I have Kaiser, my insurance. They were
Yeah.
doing a study. It was a nighttime meditation study. So I was like, oh, well, maybe this gives me an opportunity to check out something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's kind of out of the scope of my religion. I grew up Catholic,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and I sign up, I have this interview, and the lady tells me I am too stressed for their nighttime study. And I was like, what? I was devastated, but I was already so excited for it. So I was like, you know what? What do I need them for? They told me what they were going to do. I'll just do it. I'll find a YouTube meditation or something and do it at night. I
Yeah.
mean, and there really wasn't a lot like there is today.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
found a few, and sure, I'd always suffered with insomnia. Of course, I could never shut off my brain. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and think about not everything I didn't do that day, but everything I hadn't done in 10 years,
Yeah.
comes up in the middle
Mhm.
of the night. So I started to do it, and sure enough, I was sleeping better than I had in my entire life. And that was a life changer for me. Sleep is important.
Oh yeah, sleep is when you incubate your superpowers. So if you don't sleep, you don't get those, and that's when you consolidate memories. And just so you know, there was a Catholic church that came to my house. We grew up Catholic, and Jose Silva was a Catholic. In the Catholic church, it was actually a priest and a nun that ran the course. So and they taught this relaxation seminar, they didn't know what they were doing. I don't think, because they liberated us. But that, I say I'm a recovering Catholic.
Me
But
too.
the guilt and shame doesn't work. The negative programming doesn't work. But I
Right.
think that when you start to realize that you did the best you could with the information you had at hand, and what we
That's
tell
right.
people is the past is behind you, the future's
Right.
before you, but the power is right here. You
Mhm.
have the power right now to feel good or bad, to make a decision, to do whatever you need to do. And if you let in my books, I talk about the dragons of the past, because people drag them on and drag them on and drag them on. So I use a little analogy there. So, you don't need to drag those on anymore. I mean, let them go. And once you start to be gentle with yourself and understand that, hey, I was trained by people that didn't get trained. I mean, you can have a kid just by getting a back seat in a 66 Pontiac. You don't have to go to classes, you don't have to get a degree or a diploma,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you're a parent and you go, "Oh
Mhm.
shit, what do I do now?" I mean, when I think of my grandkids, and I didn't think about this when I had my kids because I was too busy being, a parent, but they're little kids, and then I go visit them and now they're speaking, and then I go visit them, they're walking, now they're little adults, and I'm going, "What the heck just happened?" You know, so we have this innate intelligence. And if we work with it, it can support us and guide us and direct us. But if we work against it, or if we think the world's working against us, then the world is really conspiring with us for our results. If you're facing a challenge right now, that's because you're building your superpower. Just like going to the gym, you don't do things you can do easily to build muscle. You do it to stress the muscles out, so then they rebuild faster and stronger. The same is true with your nervous system. We need to challenge that nervous system, but we have to have recovery. When we work with Tom Brady's group, the TBRX team with Alex Guerra, he says that every one minute of exertion, you need 2 minutes of recovery. So think about your sleep. And the whole thing about sleep is wrong. I can tell you that. You need 6.5 hours of sleep, maybe seven, maybe five for you, because you need 1 hour of deep sleep and 2 hours of REM sleep. If you get that, you'll crush any sleep metric that's out there. We've done so many sleep studies, and that's the number one thing BrainTap helps is sleep. And the reason is We need to get you to deep delta sleep, because during deep delta sleep, imagine this. In 2015, they found a new part of the physiology of the body. Before 2015, they didn't even know we had a glial lymphatic system, which means we had a lymphatic system in our brain. Every physiology book, the lymph system stops at the neck before 2015. But at 2015, they discovered this thing called the glial lymphatic system. They called the garbage system of the brain. And what happens is, because we have this protective barrier in our brain, it doesn't release toxins. If you don't sleep, you don't release toxins in your brain, because when you reach level 4 sleep, which is the deep sleep that you need, your body opens up and it's just small bursts. So it's not like 1 hour, complete 1 hour. It's like 2 minutes here, 1 minute here, but it happens in micro bursts. And if you can get that sleep cycle going, and as you're going through those cycles, when I talk about acetylcholine, when you go to theta, you actually start to create GABA. Now, GABA is a precursor to something called DMT, which a lot of people doing psychedelics, they'll go take DMT. But every cell of your body has DMT. So you probably say to yourself, I had a mountaintop experience. I was on top of the world. Well, what happened at that moment? Because when you're on top of a mountain, that mountain is resonating at 7.8 hertz frequency. Your body is resonating at that frequency. So when I was in Ames Bhopal, one of the times I brought a guru up on stage and I mapped his brain with an EEG. And I said, anybody in the audience never meditated before? Somebody raised their hand. I brought them up on stage. And within 7 minutes, I had them mimic the brainwave of the guru. And when I was done, Varun, who's one of our top researchers at Ames Bhopal, he said to me, he goes, you're cheating. I said, what do you mean I'm cheating? He goes, that guru's meditated for 30 years. That guy's never meditated before. I said, I'm not cheating. I said, have you ever meditated to a candle? He said, oh yeah, all the time. I said, a candle flickers at 10 hertz frequency. So your brain matches it. So what happens is you go into alpha. I said, you ever wonder why the gurus go to the Himalayas to meditate? He goes, yeah, to get away from people. I said, no, they're cheating. He said, what do you mean? I said, they're sitting in a isochronic tone generator called the mountain. That mountain's resonating at 7.8 hertz frequency. They're in that gamma state. So now they're creating so much DMT. They're having those spiritual bliss moments all the time because they're just sitting there and they don't have anything to worry about. You know, they're just breathing and being in that presence. So I said, well, all we're doing is we're taking the nice thing. Like I said, we're in the most beautiful time in history because we have technology that can mimic all of those things in nature. And it's not taking away from nature. You can still meditate. You can still do your things. And that's why we call it brain fitness, because imagine as an ancient culture, we would get up in the morning, the sunrise would wake us up. We would be earthed, you know, we'd be grounded. Before 1950, all the shoes had leather bottoms. We were always grounded and we weren't insulated from the earth. So we were sharing electrons with the earth. The earth was sharing electrons with us. And we're moving around. We're getting the light from the sun, which the light from the sun, actually, the hemoglobin absorbs that light energy and makes ATP. Most of the energy you get is not from the food you eat. It's from the air you breathe and the light you're exposed to. And as your body gets that energy, you move around, you function. And we'd go by a stream. All of a sudden, we'd create more alpha. You know, maybe you take a little break, just look at a mountain range and see the beauty in the world. And then you get scared because maybe an animal would show up, you know, or something. So then you would trigger more, you know, of the stress hormones. But we would be doing this all day long. People talk about heart rate variability. You know, there's something called nervous system variability too that we need. And that's where, like when we talk about mindfulness or brain fitness, or when we call brainwave entrainment, is to train your brain to be flexible. You know, when we're in different environments, we need to change gears. You know, Mike Tyson has a saying, everyone has a plan till they get hit. You know, so we have to, every one of us is going to get hit. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but at some point, like a death's going to happen. You're going to lose your job. You're not going to, somebody's going to disappoint you, you know, whatever's going on. How are you going to handle that? It's that recovery that's most important. How do you get back to balance? How do you get back to center? And doesn't come in a pill or a potion or a lotion, because you can't have a pill without a skill. So we need to create the skill. Now you can take the pill if you need to for a while, but most people don't realize SSRIs were only approved for 2 weeks of use. 2 weeks.
I was on them for 7 years.
Right. And they don't tell you that they're addictive. And they usually say you'll start to feel them at 28 days. Well, if they were to go on the market today, they've already proven that they wouldn't even make it on the market because they have no effect. It's all placebo. 40% of them, it's placebo. So you take the pill, your brain makes the change, and then you assign the change to the pill. It's not the pill, it's you. You
Yeah.
are the magic. So if you can activate your own brain and your own neurochemistry, you can make that change. You might need the pill to kind of give you a kickstart, but in just like we did a study in Brazil with opioids, we have opioid addiction. When we started the brainwave entrainment, we actually did it for pain because pain only happens in the brain. It doesn't happen in the body. You only have pain in the brain. The pain you're feeling in the body is a signal from the brain saying, hey, there's something wrong with my toe or my foot or my hand. And so we were teaching people through basically biofeedback methods. When I was growing up, there was no neurofeedback. So when we were doing breathing techniques, looking at heart rate, looking at skin temperature and things like that. And when we got people into this relaxed alpha state, their pain would go away. That's because pain only happens in beta. So when you train your brain and you start to feel some pain, hey, my body needs to relax. I need to. Now, pain is a signal, though, by the way. So you need to find out if there's something really wrong there. But if there's nothing wrong, like I've worked with veterans. One veteran I remember, he came in and he called on the phone. And he said, I have severe pain in my feet. And I go, well, I'm not a medical doctor. He goes, no, I don't have any feet. They got blown off in a war. And I said, well, come on in, because I worked with phantom pain before, because the pain was happening in his brain, but he was processing it as if he
There
had
you
feet.
go.
And what we found out was every time he went up 2 flights of stairs,
Mm.
it was the same height that he did when he jumped out of a helicopter and landed on a landmine.
The
And
same.
his brain associated that, just like we can associate other things, it associated that height with the pain. It was trying to protect him. It wasn't hurting him. It was trying to protect him. And so what happened was once he knew that, he could unplug that memory. That trigger was removed. Then he didn't have pain. And I remember him at the end of the session, he was crying. And I'm going, oh, are you still in pain? He goes, oh, no, it's all gone. He says, I can't believe that's what it was. Because we don't know, all those memories, think of them like leftovers. And you and I are out to dinner and we're having a great conversation. So we don't eat all our food and we have to-go boxes, and they give us these white to-go boxes. We take them home, we put them in our refrigerator, and we don't eat them. They just get pushed in the back of the refrigerator. And then eventually, as we open up the refrigerator, it starts stinking. And we know have some friends coming over. They might get into the refrigerator. So we're going to clean out our refrigerator before they get there. And we look at that box. It's a white box. We open it up and it's green and fuzzy now. What do we do with it? We throw it away. We don't send it to CSI. We don't say, did my mom and dad make me eat this meal? Whose fault was it that this food is in the refrigerator? We just throw it away. We forgive, we forget, and we move on. And if people would just realize that the future is where we're going to live, not the past.
Right.
Unless somebody shows me how to go back in time, which I would love to do. I have a few things I'd like to change, but we get to experience the future. We don't get to re-experience the past. Only in our mind do we get to re-experience the past.
You just explained a lot of my journey in the back. Thank you. So I'm an ancestral genealogist. It's something, through my own experiences. I studied my own, and then I've studied and worked with hundreds of people, helping them build their trees and connect with their ancestors. And when you said that our DNA stretched out, was going all the way up into space or wherever, however far it was, it felt like that I had ancestors lining up, one after one, for me to know their stories and tell their stories and
They're
learned so
within
much
you.
about history.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I had a great shaman who, his story was a travesty. He was known as the apostate, and he was converted to Catholicism. The Jesuits had converted his tribe, and I had went to this medium. And this is very early on in my journey. And the medium said, you need to learn how to connect with him. And, and I had just been dipping my toe into meditation, and I'm like, I don't know how to connect with him. And she goes, well, you need to connect with how he connected. So she gives me this card and she goes, go learn from this shaman. So I sign up for this class, and everyone's going to meet their spirit animal, but not me. I'm going to meet my ancestor. I had never been to a drumming circle before, and I was still struggling a little bit with meditation, but had some amazing experiences. So I did know it was possible. And all of a sudden, there's this, drum, and it's this beat. And I tell you, I went quicker than I had ever experienced anything. I was a little disappointed at first because all I was seeing was animals until the wolf stood up. And then I heard this comeback beat, which I'm like, no, I just got here. But
right?
that was a very tangible experience for me of that sound, and this beat was resonating with my body, and my own frequency had me go so quick.
But my first book actually that I wrote that it's not published yet because my publisher said I shouldn't publish it until I don't want to work anymore. Because it's kind of crazy, but it's called Shamanism in the 21st Century.
Oh, there you go.
Because I believe what you're saying. I mean, I've had experiences like that. I mean, I chronicle them because of being in such a young age, going into these altered states. And there's no difference to the subconscious between real or imagined. They're all real. It's all real. So your body will have an impression upon them. And so it's what is the therapeutic value? What are you getting out of it? So you're always guided. We think of time very differently than the reality of time. We think of time as let's say, a pause between experiences. But the reality is there's only one time right now. Everything's happening simultaneously. And then our consciousness sorts it all out and puts us on a timeline. And there's an infinite number of those. That's why I say to people all the time, there's only an infinite number of possibilities from one moment in time. You can always go back to what doesn't work. So try something different, do something different. And so when you think about the shaman's journey, what I love about the shaman's mindset is you live your life as if you're going to die today. This is your last day. What would you do? Who would you love? How would you serve your community? But you plan it as if you are actually planting a seed for the future. The old saying, the Indians have the saying, the future is it's our inheritance we're leaving to our children, right? And we haven't done a very good job of it as a community so far. So now people are waking up and saying, hey, we need to do something about this. Whether greenhouse and all these things are true or not doesn't matter. We still need to take care of the land. We need to take care of the air. We need to take care of people. And it's just common sense. So there's always has to be this pendulum swing where it's super radical at first and then it becomes normalized, So I think that more people are waking up. Some people have that and they go crazy because they don't understand it. They don't have any context for it. In neurophysiology, we call that brain priming. So when you think about priming, so when you think about meditation, that's why when you go to a teacher, they prime your brain. They say, this is what you might experience, what's going on. So you don't get shocked. Because
Right.
if you don't have the neural connections, if you don't have a way to connect that information, the brain rules it out as wasted information. Like if I ask you, what were you doing last year at this exact moment in time, unless something really significant was happening at this moment in time, you don't remember it because it's not important. But guess what? You recorded it. Every person out there listening has a perfect memory. It's the recall system that gets damaged, and it's all about energy. So if you don't have enough energy, you don't remember it. So you go, I know, and that's where stress comes in, right? So if people are under stress, so when you have these moments like you did, where you meet your wolf or your spirit guide and these kind of things, it's like you're okay. It's just your subconscious saying you're not alone. Somebody's with you. You're taken care of. You're never alone. We're all connected. They did a study with mice. And it was a pretty incredible study. They took a group of mice and they trained them. Every time they smelt sandalwood, these mice would jump. And then they waited 5 generations. And the babies of these mice, as soon as they got old enough, they had them smell sandalwood. They started jumping, just like the mice they trained.
Wow. Still in there.
Yes. So that genetic memory was there because whatever your mom and dad knew up to the time you were born,
Yeah.
Whatever their mom and dad knew up to the time they were born, whatever going back 7 generations, all that knowledge is there. It's just we don't have access to it. So imagine people think the internet or AI is such a big deal, but the reality is that you have a 100 billion neural bit processor called the human brain, and it interfaces. This is not you. When you die, they've done studies. When you die, you lose 3/4 of an ounce. That's you. So who is that 3/4 of an ounce? Why do you weigh differently from 1 second to the next? That's because the energy that animates this vehicle it's no longer there. The energy is no longer there. It's like having a radio that doesn't have any batteries in it. It's still a radio, but it can't pick up any station. It can't pick up any frequency. It can't broadcast any information. Same thing's true with the cells. So we want to keep this body as healthy as possible, especially the brain, because it's the control center. And then that sends the information down through the spine, which is we call the keyboard of the brain, and that sends it out to the limbs. But if your brain doesn't lack energy, just for the listeners to understand, your brain has voltage. Right? We can measure this. So when we were born, we had 18.1 volts. That's why we could learn everything. Now, about the age of 27, it goes to about 10.1 volts.
Oh, Lord.
Now, as we age,
I'm almost 50. Whatever you got.
Yeah. So as we age, that voltage, if you live if you're eating poorly, you're not walking, you're not breathing, you're a negative thinker, these things all affect energy. In fact, they found that negative thinkers will live 6.5 years less than positive thinkers.
Believe it.
So when you think about, we know that if you get below 7 volts of energy in the brain, because we've done a study it's in a book called Saving Your Brain, and we talk about all the women in the study were taken off the dementia scale in 6 weeks using BrainTap, because when we bring their brain voltage back up over 7, dementia symptoms went away. If their brain voltage is below 4, they'll start having Alzheimer's symptoms, because the brain, if I asked you to think of your favorite vacation, you could probably think of it, right? But if you didn't have the energy, your brain couldn't do it, because it activates so many different regions of the brain. They say up to 10 regions of the brain. It has to reassemble that memory. Now, every time it reassembles it, it's going to distort it, delete it, and change it based on your current frame of reference.
Wow.
So if you don't revivify, like you were saying, when you go to sleep in the past, before you kind of awoken and started doing your thing, you didn't know how to do that. So all the past shoulds would come up.
Yeah. Right.
And so what I train people to do, that's why doing like the 4-8 breath before going to sleep, where you breathe into the count of 4, breathe out to the count of 8. When you breathe into the count of 4, you're triggering the sympathetic system. That's going to trigger those negative thoughts. That's okay. They're there. We need those to protect us and keep us safe. But then we breathe out to the count of 8 twice as much. Just like the recovery, 1 minute of exertion, 2 minutes of recovery. The same thing's true with the breath. Now, when you do that, when you're doing that out breath, that's when you start to think about everything you're grateful for, the small things. And if you start to put that together, you'll start to assemble a success reel that will take you to sleep every night. And if you start to focus on that success reel, what will happen is in the morning, you'll wake up and go, wow, I wonder what exciting, positive, wonderful things are going to happen today. Today's wonderful. What's going to happen? How can I transform the world? But if you're always looking internally for the world to solve your problems, then, nobody's come to save you. It's you. You've got to save yourself. You're here because you have the power to save yourself and to save your community. First, your family, or your friends, or your coworkers, and then the world, because it all starts with you, and people don't realize that. And it's all about energy. So if you don't have the energy in the brain, you can't do these things. So that's why I got into brain fitness. And, even though I didn't really plan on doing it when I was growing up, but I was really into electronics, and I was more of a geek, tinkering with things. But I thought, how can I amplify what Jose Silva did to get people to do this without any effort? And so that's why I created BrainTap.
What's interesting is these solfeggio tunes and how these are so healing. You were talking about the different hertz of mountains and of nature and of our bodies. So is that what you're talking about in your device, these frequencies?
Yeah, we use those. We have solfeggio frequencies, we have Noget frequencies, and we also there's another frequency band that we use too. But they all trigger different things. So remember those mirror neurons. So let's put it in perspective for the listeners. So the reason people are affected by EMF, they're broadcasting a frequency that our body doesn't understand, 50 million hertz. So our body is trying to figure out, what is that frequency trying to get my cells to do? The body. So we took people, and I'm on the board of Dan Devon's Radiation Nation, they call it. And what we showed was some people are so affected by this, they'll actually pass out when they go by a cell tower, because the cells shut down. That's what our body does. Just like we play dead. There's the fight or flight, but there's also the freeze response. We get in too much stress, we'll just shut down. So the body shuts down. What we did is we took their shoes off, and they didn't. Because our body is designed to ground, just like lightning hitting the ground. There's so many millions of times the lightning hits the earth every second, because the atmosphere charges the earth, which is a living, breathing being, right? Gaia, or whatever you want to call it. So as you think about it, so we're in tune with that. But if we're disconnected from it, and then somebody sends another frequency. So think of the sun as our mitochondria for the solar system.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that sun is actually beaming codes to us. We call it the circadian rhythm. So
Right.
at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when you have that dip and people think it's coffee time or tea time or time to get a piece of chocolate, it's really your body saying it's time to recycle.
Mm.
And we used to, in ancient cultures, we'd take a little nap, right? A siesta or whatever. And our body's designed to do that because in the Serengeti, nobody does anything at 2 o'clock in the morning. And that's where all the genetic memories come from, right? So our bodies are having this psychological load. Now at 2 o'clock in the evening, 2 o'clock at night, our temperature increases 2 degrees. It's another reset for the biological system. That's all being beamed by codes from the sun. And now they know this is true in science. It's not a metaphysical concept. It's not woo-woo. It's real fact in science. Now, they also know that if you don't get to bed by 10 o'clock in your time zone, you're not making as much melatonin. If you don't get to bed by 11, you don't clean your liver as well. So and I'm just talking about a couple of different biological functions. So when we're in tune with the earth, which is in tune with the solar system, which is in tune with the universe, which is in tune with the omniverse, all of these things, then when we're out of phase with that, disruptions happen. It's all about flow and energy. So if we get into the flow and energy, that's where the shamans come in, right? So they knew the flow of energy. In these demons, if you will, in this world, if you think of the yin and yang symbol, that's why there's that little black dot in the white and there's a little white dot in the black. There's always a little bit of good in the bad person and there's a little bit of bad in the good person, and we have to honor that part of ourselves because it's not that we're negative. It's just that it's just us. It's just we live in this dualistic universe. And once we harness that, that's the whole thing about what they call the warrior's journey, right? So when we're getting our superpowers, we're faced with this. Now, if you focus too much on that little dot and it's the negative one, then you become the bad person with a little bit of good. And, so we need to stay in the middle where we focus on, it's all where you put your attention. The old story about the two wolves fighting in the head when the little boy comes up to the chief and says, "Hey, I got two wolves fighting in my head." And the chief said, "Everyone has two wolves fighting in their head." And he says, "Well, which one's going to win?" He said, "The one you feed." So that's where mindfulness, meditation, brain fitness, BrainTap, those kind of things come in, is which one of those are you feeding right now today? And it's not just the food you eat, it's the thoughts you think, the people you hang around with. I always say there's gainers and drainers in your life, and sometimes it's hard, but you got to get rid of some drainers. And sometimes they're members of your family. There's always that person that walks in the room and they walk in, it's just a little brighter, everybody's happy and they're smiling. And then there's a person walks in and they go, "Oh no, Fred's here," or whatever, they like Debbie Downer, in Saturday Night Live, they bring the energy down in the room because they want to focus on all the negative. We can focus on the negative all day long, but if we focus on the solution, that's what motivates us and moves energy through our body. And that's why purpose is so important. So when you think about these frequencies, I'll tell you one story about solfeggio frequencies. We did a study with PTSD in Dallas, Texas with vets. And they were, PTSD, you can get pretty negative because your brain gets fixated. Imagine you're in a war and every day you're seeing people die around you. Your uncertainty is at its max. 100% of the time. And then you get sent home. Well, your brain's used to an environment of chaos. So if there's no chaos, you create it so that you feel comfortable. Everybody around you doesn't feel comfortable, but you feel comfortable. And they go, "What's wrong with him? What's wrong with her?" Well, so we wanted to use a psilocybin. And at the time, I'd never done psilocybin, so I didn't know what to think about it. So now I'm a big believer in it, what it does. But in the process, what we did was we mapped the brains of people on psilocybin. And what we noticed was there's a region of the brain that is associated with spiritual connection. It's right to the right, in the right hemisphere, and it lights up like when Buddhist adepts meditate and people get into those heightened states of consciousness. And when you do a psilocybin, that part of the brain lights up and high gamma happens. So we created a whole series with solfeggio frequencies. It's 10 different sessions, and they're all different lengths from 11 minutes to 66 minutes. And people use it on their ketamine trips now and things like that, because we can put the brain into the right environment. In those frequencies, we know our body, just like the EMF signals, but we're using healing. They could be using solfeggio frequencies to beam our cell phones. These
They
phones
should.
could be healing devices while we're walking around using them. And I think eventually they will, because we're walking around with quantum computers and they could be working to heal us instead of to harm us. But what it is greed and people thinking it's woo-woo when it's not. We're not physical beings. We are light beings. We can create an environment in our homes, in our work environments. I mean, the earth already does it. So if we can get out into the earth, it's going to be even better. But if we can't, because we live in buildings, we drive in cars, I mean, we can start to look at these things and change our environment. And then that changes our psychology, it changes the way we function in the world.
I sure am glad that your dad shared this with you and that you were sharing this with everyone. I mean, what a blessing. And it came out of addiction, which was his kryptonite that
Yep.
made him a superhero. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it so much. And tell me about BrainTap and what is this device? There's examples of it on your website. I saw
Yep.
someone have it on.
Yeah.
I love it.
When I first invented it, of course, there were 6 of us, so I didn't do it myself. There were a
Okay.
team of people. But what we did was we were just looking at how can we get people out of pain, right? So we used sound like binaural beats. But what we found was just listening to binaural beats isn't enough.
Okay.
Because if you don't have perfect hearing, binaural beats don't work that well. That's why a lot of people say, I tried binaural beats, they didn't work. Well, that's because only a small percentage of people have exact hearing, in both ears. So if I put a 300 hertz frequency in one ear and a 310 hertz frequency in the other, the brain would hear a phantom sound of 10. But if they're off, just like the brain in those dementia patients, we found that one brain was at 9 volts, one brain went at 7 volts. They're not going to communicate. You're going to start having dementia-like symptoms. So the brains have to be harmonized. The frequencies have to be harmonized. So then we put in what's called isochronic tones. This is like the environment is, our earth is a resonant frequency generator, really. We walk around, whether we're in the forest, like they call forest bathing, when you're walking in the forest or out in your yard doing your yard work, you're actually getting a frequency treatment. Basically, we're mimicking nature. That's what nature does. But now we can bring the technology to us. So what we did with BrainTap, we said, how can we bring what nature's already doing to people and they can do it quickly? So in the morning, we have sessions called SMR. So think of SMR as, it's called sensory motor rhythm. It's a brainwave between beta and alpha. This is the one we need in the morning. It's also the one as we get older and better looking that atrophies. So as you age, and also under stress, it collapses. That's why we can't, that's why they say the biggest fear is public speaking, so, but now the biggest fear is aging without your memories. But they're both the same thing, because when you get stressed, that brainwave, when we did our autism study, we found that when we got the kids up to 23% alpha, they started speaking with no speech pathologist.
I have a child who's 21 years old on Spectrum.
Yep.
I
So
would love to
and
try.
if we did a brain map on him, I would guarantee you that his alpha is very low or maybe even non-existent. Once he trains his brain to get it into alpha, we've had people just they go, it's a miraculous. No, it's the body, the innate intelligence. The body knows what to do. But it'd be like me being in my home, but I don't have the code to my Wi-Fi, but I want to get on the internet. So I get all pissed off because I can't get on the Wi-Fi. I need the code. That's alpha. So in the morning, we need alpha. Now, what most people do, which if people have heard my other talks, they don't like this part of it, but if you drink coffee first thing in the morning, you crushed what's called the cortisol curve. Okay. You just slept all night long. You don't need coffee first thing in the morning. What I recommend you do is drink coffee about 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock. Like when Dave Asprey came out with bulletproof coffee, they drank it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
I drink my coffee at 2 o'clock in the afternoon too.
There you go. Good. Okay. All right. All right. Good. So what that does, because your cortisol trough is really high then. So you don't need a lot of relaxation, then you need motivation. You need drive and purpose. So these sessions are more motivating. And then in the afternoon, when you have that crash at 2 o'clock, we have alpha, we have theta and gamma sessions. These are our reboot sessions. And we did a study at Google and Microsoft with programmers. And we showed that if they did a 20-minute session in the middle of the day, and there's a whole study online about it. Julie Arndt has a TED talk about it, where she took our study and she said, she came to me, she said, they're having burnout with these programmers coming back from COVID. I said, well, they need to do a session at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They all said, no way, we can't do that. We can't take 20 minutes off. But what we showed them was they got 26% more work done when they did that. So they became more efficient when they did it. Their sleep score improved over 70%. Their happiness score improved 54%. Because they needed a reboot. So imagine you get a reboot in the afternoon. Now you get 2 mornings.
Right.
So you get more work done. Now in the evening, we need to shut down the brain. So we have sessions that are what we call deep delta sessions. So we want to get you to delta as quickly as possible. And I love it. I just spoke at Dave Asprey's event, and all these biohackers get up there and say, "This is my sleep routine. I turn off all the lights. I do this. I do that." I said, "You can do all those things. I'll bet you that I can do whatever. I'll do my brain tap right before going to sleep. I'll beat you every time, because the sooner you get to Delta." We took coal miners. Imagine this, because a lot of people say you can't have light before you go to bed, which if we didn't have blue light, we'd all have seasonal affective disorder. So there's a lot of bad news out there. Now, the screens are bad. I mean, I'm not saying that the dirty blue light isn't bad, but we need blue light. We just need tuned blue light. So we use tuned blue light in the eyes, and we use earth frequencies to train the brain to go there. And so what we did with these coal miners is we took one group and we had them do the headset. One group just used our app. Within 3 weeks, and we did 2 weeks before that, we measured their sleep because we had to have a baseline. The average coal miner spent 10 hours a night in bed. Their sleep scores were terrible because they only got 1 minute of deep sleep. So being in bed doesn't equal, when I said earlier, all the sleep information out there is wrong. We need 1 hour of deep sleep, 2 hours of REM sleep. And then really the statistics really show 6.5 hours is optimal for peak performance and for longevity. So when you think about these coal miners, after 3 weeks, they were sleeping, and they did it 3 times a day, just like in 6 weeks. Then after that, you can do it once a day if you want. But you need to, at first, it's just like taking an airplane off the runway. We got to get the brain back modulating and harmonizing, and then you can fly right. The group that didn't use the light, it took 6 weeks, but it still happened because sound, remember, when you close your eyes, you're shutting down part of the brain. But if you have light stimulus, then the brain stays awake. And that's part of the thing, like your coffee cup. You want to stay awake. That's what Silva and mindfulness teaches you. Meditation isn't sleeping. It's an awakened mind where you can process the information. The whole thing is about learning to do this on your own. But so many people don't know how to do that because they don't have a teacher. So what BrainTap does is use light, sound, and vibration to get you in the right environment, take you out of this environment, put you into a cohesive, coherent environment where now you can reach these brainwave states without any effort on your part. It doesn't take anything. I mean, and we did this with music too, just so the listeners understand. It's not just the music. We tested everything, but we took music and we had people listen to it, this 10 cycle music. And while they were on it, we did this with over 1,000 students in Brazil. And we showed their brain activity while they're listening to music, relaxing music. And yes, indeed, it took them to alpha. But as soon as the music was done, they went right back to their stress state, right back to their, what they call the default mode network. And went right back to their stress state. But when I put that same music, I put my algorithm in the background that taught them to go to alpha. That's why we call it brain fitness. It took them 72 hours to regulate back without any stimulus. Now, if you interrupt that pattern, what happens is, just like riding a bike, we learn to keep that balance. We learn to keep that focus. So what we found is that as long as you do some kind of brain fitness every 72 hours, your brain will stay regulated. It's some people go, is it addictive? And I said, I don't know. I've been doing it since 1986. So, you have to figure that out. So, it's one of these things like, would you, when somebody says, how often do you brush your teeth? Well, every day. You only brush the teeth you want to keep. You only exercise the brain cells you want to keep. If you don't want to keep those neurons, then don't do anything. They're going to atrophy because it's called neural pruning. When we were born, most people think differently. They now know that we have neuroplasticity, right? So that means our brain is energy. It has more energy. But when we're born, we have all this energy. So we have a lot of neuroplasticity. But as we age, it does neural pruning. As we learn, we actually get dumber, not smarter.
I feel that way.
So that's why we have to challenge ourselves, read new books, listen to podcasts, stimulate the brain. And it's not about what to think, it's how to think.
Yeah.
How do we think about our life? How do we think about our world? How do we think about what we're doing? And if we do that, our brain stays open. That's why they say, be like a child again. It's always Christmas morning. How can we look at this world with awe and wonder? And then the brain stays awake. And we don't fall into the pitfalls of what this world is about. Unfortunately, it's not all roses out there, but we can be in the world, but not of the world, as they say. It's really the soul's work that we're doing. We're down here doing our thing, but it's doing its thing too. There's a bigger picture here.
You've been so much fun, and I've learned so much. I think my mind seriously is blown. I have to go and recover. Thank you, Dr. Patrick. And tell everybody where they can go to find you and find your amazing brain tap.
Right. If they go to BrainTap.com, there's a place on there where they can get a 14-day free trial.
Okay.
If you don't like it, just cancel before 14 days. It doesn't cost you anything. 90% of people that listen to the trial will have better sleep.
Wow.
So hopefully you'll be part of that 90%. Of course, I have my own podcast called Brain Fitness Podcast, and
Awesome.
they can check that out. And I have a YouTube channel where they can watch a lot of different videos and things that I say. They're not always like this one, because this was a little bit more open and more consciousness based, which was nice. I love to do it.
Right. Thanks so much, Dr. Patrick. Have a
Thank you.
beautiful day.
You too.
Sense of soul.